Welcome to the 12th module in this educational series. Here, we will address the topic of research for evidence-based practice. Research plays a central role in almost every organization, and blood services are no exception. The importance of research in blood establishments has long been acknowledged by clinicians and scientists. Such research has driven many of the innovations we can note today if we compare operations in a modern blood service with practice 30, 20, or even just 10 years ago. However, research has had a lesser impact in the field of donor recruitment and retention. Here, activity is often based on gut instinct or guesswork about what approaches are most effective. This is despite the existence of research evidence in the public domain that might help drive better practice. It also ignores the opportunity for recruiters to conduct their own research and so refine their approaches based on study findings. An analogy here might be with an advertising agency trying to dispose the public towards a client's product. Is it likely that they will come up with a marketing campaign and spend millions on its launch without some research to see if the public will react favorably to the messages they are promoting? Of course, it is not. But this is precisely what many donor recruiters around the world do every day. There are 8 key learning objectives that will be pursued in this module. These are shown on the slide. We hope that, at a minimum, this module will help you reflect on how you can bring more academic rigor to developing and validating your strategies. You are not necessarily expected to become a research expert, but there will likely be those in your organization who are. Understanding some of the technical detail will help in your communications with them as you seek advice and support to improve the way in which you approach the recruitment and retention challenge. Here are key definitions, acronyms, and expressions used in this module. Please familiarize yourself with these. The list of terminology around research issues is extensive. If needed, check back on these definitions as you work through the slides. Before we proclaim the need for research in blood donor programs, let us first unpack the definition of the term research. Research can be defined as the systematic study of a given subject, field, or problem undertaken to discover facts or principles and reach new conclusions. The systematic investigation implies that it is a careful, well thought through, and rigorous scientific process. There are several ways in which this can be done, as we will discover shortly. The need to establish facts is paramount, as this will enable evidence-based decisions to be made, which may provide new insights into how things are to be done. Hence, the coupling here of the terms research and innovation. As shown on this slide, research and innovation is one of the means by which your blood service can ensure future growth by developing new products, services, or processes to improve and expand its operations. For your blood service, the new product or service could be a novel approach to recruitment, a new youth program perhaps, such as Pledge 25 Club, or introducing a blood donor rewards program. Let us now explore what we mean by research for evidence-based practice. For blood donor recruiters, evidence-based practice is the process of collecting, processing, and implementing research findings to improve blood donor recruitment approaches and donor-related outcomes, such as donors recruited and retained. When evaluating evidence-based practice studies, focus on the 4 criteria as described here. It is important to assess the validity of the evidence. This looks at the legitimacy, accuracy, and soundness of all aspects of the study, as you will learn throughout this module. There is need for the reliability of the results. This promotes the idea of the extent to which a measurement's result is consistent. The relevance needs to be assessed to ensure there is logical connection between 2 ideas, tasks, or events. On the outcome, there is need to ascertain that the conclusions reached are through the process of research and not simply opinions or speculations. If you look at the research process cycle, you will notice that it all starts with a research idea. This will be complemented by a comprehensive literature review so that there is an appreciation of all past and current evidence around this subject area. It is not encouraged to embark on studies where there is already available information in the public domain, as this just wastes time and effort for no incremental benefit. In such cases, use the available evidence to inform your decision-making, since any research should add to the already available body of information rather than duplicate it. It is important to have a clear theoretical formulation of the research problem. You should have specific empirical research questions and be able to answer these based on the study data you are going to gather. Your research questions will inform your research design in a way that will enable you to best answer the questions. If the study design is wrong, it will be difficult to remedy the difficulties this will create, and you may end up with unusable results. Develop appropriate tools, such as questionnaires, for data collection, and have a data analysis plan that reflects your research design. Follow a clearly defined data collection procedure and use piloted and approved instruments. Where possible, use electronic means to collect data, such as SurveyMonkey. Data quality is crucial. Once you are satisfied with the quality of your data, you can proceed to analyze it using appropriate statistical analysis methods, which should enable you to answer your empirical research questions. It is common practice to work with a statistician who will be able to guide you on sound study design and assist with the data analysis. Compare your results with any earlier published research. Ultimately, make conclusions about your study, which may include new research ideas. Here, we summarize a complete picture of how research works based on the points already discussed. Your study will not be complete unless you disseminate your findings, which can be done in various ways that include presentation to your colleagues, organizations, congresses, and ultimately through peer-reviewed journals. Acceptance for publication after peer review is the research gold standard. It involves evaluation of your work by one or more experts in the field and functions as a form of self-regulation by qualified members of a profession. Peer review methods are used to maintain quality standards, improve performance, and provide credibility. Several classifications of research exist, and so definitions can be fluid. Basic research is undertaken to determine fundamental facts and relationships within a discipline or field of study. For instance, you might look at the proportion of blood donors in your setting falling into the classifications of voluntary, non-remunerated, family replacement, and paid donors. Applied research is relevant at two levels, namely subject matter and problem-solving knowledge. For the subject matter knowledge, the research aims to develop the implications of basic knowledge using our basic research example of donor types. In applied research, one might look at factors that may assist in converting family replacement donors to voluntary non-remunerated donors. Problem-solving research is undertaken specifically for the purpose of obtaining information to help resolve a particular problem. For example, many services experience very high donor attrition rates. In the early stages of the relationship with a donor, it is important to understand what causes this and what steps can be taken to improve retention. In applied research, it is important to use the results. Otherwise, it will have been largely futile to conduct the research in the first place. See the arrows on the graph that link the various boxes. This emphasizes that these research types are not conducted independently. There are a lot of interlinkages as they feed into each other. Another key classification is primary versus secondary research. Primary research is a methodology used by researchers to collect data directly, rather than depending on data collected from previously conducted research. The types of primary research methods include observations, survey, focus group discussions, and experiments. Note too that this primary research can also be classified as descriptive or analytical studies. There are a range of sources for primary data, but most relevant are likely to be your donor database or panel booking and collection statistics form. Do, however, consider other less obvious sources. A summary of the advantages and disadvantages associated with primary research is given on the slide. One of the key advantages is that data will be up to date since you have collected it and ensured it is exactly what you need to answer your research questions. The disadvantages include the resources required, since it can be both costly and time-consuming to help manage this. You may wish to include research activities within your routine operational budget, as opposed to making ad hoc arrangements. Cited here are examples of findings from previous primary research activities, both reasons for donating and for not donating. Some of these findings will be specific, both to culture and to the system of donating operating within a country. Therefore, it is important to understand the situation in your own setting and design your evidence-based recruitment strategies around the insights provided to you through your own research. Secondary research involves the systematic review of existing research. This can look at single studies or can involve meta-analysis, which is statistical analysis of multiple scientific studies. Secondary research is much more cost-effective than primary research as it makes use of already existing data rather than collecting data firsthand. Yet another research classification is quantitative versus qualitative research. In qualitative research, you may be more concerned with the individual's personal experiences of the problem under study. It is especially useful where you do not understand which are the important issues. The aim of a qualitative analysis is to get a complete detailed description, say, of why blood donors are donating or not. The open-ended nature of these methods allows for more flexibility in identifying factors and practical strategies than the formal, structured quantitative approach. In quantitative research, you systematically observe changes in the phenomena of interest while manipulating what are believed to be causal influences. All aspects of the study are carefully designed before data is collected. The researcher uses tools such as questionnaires or equipment to collect data. Hybrid or mixed method can also be used to analyze a sample of cases qualitatively, then code information to make inferences about a population on a quantitative basis. This is an example of a study on donor recruitment and illustrates a number of issues which we will shortly explore further. The study type is cross-sectional, meaning it looks at a subset of a population at a specific point in time. The problem being addressed, that of not donating, utilizes the theory of planned behavior, which itself emanates from other basic research. Also, see how the study suggests future research priorities. Having established the psychological prerequisites for donating behavior, it recommends further exploration to see whether campaigns targeting these attributes will be more effective than current strategies. As you may have noted from the study example in the previous slide, all research is done based on some form of research design. This provides general guidelines for thinking about specific aspects of study conduct. There are two broad categories of study design, namely observation and experimental, and the flow diagram shows in a systematic way how study designs are classified. Each approach has its strengths and limitations, which it is helpful to understand, and so a series of examples will be presented in the following slides to illustrate the application of different designs. You may be concerned as to how you can select an appropriate study design given the centrality of this step. The answer lies in having a good study question that is relevant, novel, feasible, and importantly, simple. It is helpful to note that the strength of evidence arising from studies varies with the study design, and it follows that it is crucial to choose your design with this in mind. At the lowest end of this evidential spectrum are experts' opinions through to the strongest evidence, which is obtained from the various forms of randomized controlled trials. As you formulate your study, you will need to crystallize your ideas in a study protocol. The key elements of the study protocol are research questions, significance, design, subjects, variables, and statistical issues. There is a purpose for each element, as shown on the summary table on this slide. In most studies, the data you will collect will be in the form of either dependent or independent variables. It is at this stage that there is need to determine the budgetary requirements to implement the study, or alternatively, to design the protocol within budget constraints. As noted earlier, it is recommended that blood services have a research component within the operational budget to support this work. In most studies, it is not possible because of resource constraints to study every member of the population. However, we can still study the population of interest based on a small representative sample of that population. To ensure the study sample is sufficiently representative, there is need to define your sampling frame, that is, where the sample is going to be drawn from. You will need to assess the completeness and integrity of your sampling frame so that there won't be errors emanating from the incompleteness of the lists. Remember, the sample findings will be used to make inferences about characteristics of the population as a whole. Hence, it is important to minimize errors at this stage of the process. There are three factors that influence sample representativeness. These are sampling procedure, which can either be random or non-random, sample size, which refers to the number of participants, and participation response rates, which refers to the percentage of responses obtained from all targeted respondents. With regard to the latter, some respondents may be sent questionnaires in a study but never bother to return them, and this naturally affects your study results. There are instances when one might need to sample the entire population. For example, in cases where your population is very small and/or where response rates are expected to be extremely low. There are several different types of samples. It is important to understand the type that you have, because the use and the subsequent interpretation of the data depends on this. The most desirable from a confidence perspective is the random sample, as this allows the results to be generalized to the entire population. The detailed sampling process comprises the following: selection of the sampling frame, sampling method, and sample size and implementation. The latter includes data collection and the final review of the sampling process. In specifying a method for selecting participants from the frame, a straightforward approach is to use simple random sampling. For example, you could take, say, every 5th Pledge 25 Club member on the register. The main reason for blood services to conduct surveys is to answer important questions relating to blood donor recruitment and management. There are various ways to conduct such surveys. These include face-to-face and telephone interviews, or alternatively, these can be self-administered on a computer or utilize online tools such as SurveyMonkey. This study example, conducted in Ethiopia, brings together the various research concepts we have been discussing. The research problem is poor rates of donor recruitment amongst the student target group. We can observe the two sampling methods used, namely stratified sampling or selecting sub-populations, and then simple random sampling to select participants from this group. The data collection tool used was a self-administered questionnaire. In the results, you will note that the level of knowledge on voluntary, non-remunerated blood donation was found to be low, while where there was awareness, a significant number of students had an unfavorable attitude towards it. There were also issues around poor operational practice. Based on the study findings, the researchers recommended incorporation of a short training course for the health science students in the existing curriculum. So, here, we see study findings guiding policy direction. Here is another study example, this time on the use of recruitment leaflets. In this study, you will notice a hierarchical approach was used to address the identified problem. Initially, a content analysis was undertaken, and thereafter, an experiment. The results indicate that the leaflets being studied were helpful in imparting knowledge about donation, but not in terms of donor recruitment. It is important that if you have pamphlets in use at your service, you consider this kind of content analysis an experiment. This will help determine their effectiveness and so assist you with the donor recruitment challenge. This third study example looks at the issue of waiting times and the impact on satisfaction. Waiting times at the donation clinic or event is a critical issue for most blood services, and this study demonstrates how research on this topic can be conducted. Note the various research elements, such as study type, sample size, population, and variables. Also, an evidence-based recommendation is provided, namely that future research could explore the application of the service industry approach to waiting times for blood donation. Such strategies could include setting clear expectations, providing distraction activities, and employee training to turn negative experiences into positive ones. But only through research can it be demonstrated that such approaches are effective and therefore worth investing in. The issue of incentives is both central and controversial within blood services, and not just for reasons of blood safety. The motivation crowding theory suggests that incentives can undermine intrinsic motivation and thus reduce rather than encourage blood donation behavior. The research concluded that when operating in a voluntary, non-remunerated environment, blood services should view donors as supply partners rather than customers. Only consider non-monetary incentives that are congruent with the act of donation and provide private rather than public recognition of key milestones. With regard to the last point, whilst this evidence seems to suggest that the marketing benefits of public recognition as promoted in other modules of this series are limited, caution should be exercised before embracing this conclusion. When questioned over motivations, respondents may sometimes say what they think is acceptable or will show them as individuals in the most favorable light. They may therefore not be entirely truthful when discussing the importance of some motivational factors. The likelihood is that this will differ by cultural setting. And again, only research can pinpoint attitudes in your own country. The issue of donor retention is central to the blood donor recruitment function. You will note from the slide that almost half of first-time blood donors did not return to make a second donation, a fairly typical figure that can be observed in many low-income settings, though in this case, the percentage was considered high. In this study, the aim was to determine any relationships between return rates of first-time donors, the number of donations in the first year, and the donor's demographic characteristics. The researchers noted that understanding the importance of the number of donations in the first year for donors' long-term retention was critical. This because it will encourage the tailoring of recruitment programs and be an incentive for more effective management of the early-stage donor relationship. A further study example illustrates the myriad of topics that can be researched. This one highlights an operational challenge that can frustrate the blood donor recruiter's efforts, namely acceptance or otherwise of a donor following a hemoglobin test. It was noted that without appropriate performance control, capillary hemoglobin screening by either the copper sulfate method or by the then novel portable hemoglobinometers could be inaccurate, thus potentially affecting both donor safety and the blood supply. Experiments can also be done within the blood donor recruitment program. These involve research methods in which conditions are controlled so that one or more independent variables can be manipulated to test a hypothesis about a dependent variable. It is recommended to use experimental research design in the following conditions, namely, you strongly suspect a cause and effect relationship exists between two conditions, that the independent variable can be introduced to participants and can be manipulated, and finally, that the resulting dependent variable can be measured for all participants. So, for example, you may wish to study whether increasing the quality of refreshments leads to an improvement in donor retention. An example of an experimental study is provided here, focusing on donor-get-donor activity. Donors in the intervention group received either a theory-based leaflet to enhance recruitment motivation, plus 5 postcards to facilitate recruitment, or just the postcards alone. Donors in the control group received no materials. At 1-week follow-up, donors in the intervention group reported a higher intention to engage in donor recruitment, and more recruitment activity was observed than was the case for donors in the control group. These findings echo research in the commercial sector that suggests that member-get-member activity is an extremely cost-effective way to generate new business. Therefore, blood services without an active donor-get-donor program are strongly advised to develop one. This example demonstrates patient story or experience-based research. Interestingly, in this study, it was shown that patients might feel that transfusions could modify their behavior or values, and that certain personality traits of the donor could be transmitted. This highlights the opportunity for patients' stories to inform educational approaches for healthcare workers who can in turn educate patients. A well-informed patient can be used as a donor recruitment agent, sharing their blood transfusion stories with the public and urging greater participation in the blood donation activity. Understanding the wide range of applications for blood and the impact on the lives of individual recipients is extremely motivating for donors and non-donors alike. As you embark on research, it is important to observe research ethics. This concept concerns the responsibility of researchers to be honest and respectful to all individuals who are affected by their research studies or their reports of the study's results. Research ethics committees are set up within institutions to evaluate the ethical acceptability of research before participants can be enrolled in a study. In your research work, it is important to seek ethical approval. If you are engaging blood donors in any study, ensure that the donor's consent is sought and given, and that the information provided is protected. It is helpful to appreciate the benefits of collaboration in research, and this slide shares detail of 3 international research collaborations. The purpose of the TREC project was to strengthen the capacity of blood transfusion services in Africa to generate their own research. This in order to develop evidence-based, Africa-specific transfusion policies and practice. The third recipient epidemiology and donor evaluation study, or REDS 3, was a 7-year research program which focused on both blood banking and transfusion medicine research in countries including South Africa. The Francophone Africa Transfusion Research Network was created in May 2007 with the objective of developing common, evidence-based blood safety policies that may be adapted to each country's situation. It is important to determine if your institution has an enabling environment for the conduct of research. You will find it difficult to undertake studies and utilize the findings if there is not a culture supportive of research endeavors. There are 8 key research capacity components that will need to be addressed at an institutional level by senior management. Having now discussed many of the key research concepts, you may be wondering how you yourself can contribute to research. There are 4 domain areas where contribution can be made, namely through identifying research problems and promoting, participating, and collaborating in research projects. With regard to this final domain, all research requires that financial resources be available, and collaboration may be helpful in bringing such budgetary support. As you embark on your research journey, please note that there is a code of conduct expected of you as a scientific practitioner. There are 5 overarching principles that should guide you, namely scrupulousness, reliability, verifiability, impartiality, and independence. There is already progress regarding blood service research in Africa. The National Blood Service Ghana has a defined research and development program. They indicate that R&D within NBSG will be responsive to the evolving needs for blood transfusion research. This in ways that include facilitating the development of research capacity in underdeveloped areas and the training of researchers. Similarly, the South African National Blood Service indicates that research is integral to its operations and very much a part of core business. Research is conducted internally and with third-party collaborators to improve the safety, quality, and availability of the blood supply and the practice of transfusion medicine. As we have already discussed, you need to identify appropriate research topics to conduct relevant research while avoiding replicating existing evidence. The Africa Society for Blood Transfusion periodically publishes research priorities that can be used as a starting reference point. There are 5 key research categories identified, including blood donors and blood donation. The slide suggests some topic areas within this category that seem ripe for research. To begin your journey towards evidence-based practice, the paper referred to in this slide can be easily found through any online search engine. It helpfully summarizes the findings from multiple knowledge, attitude, and practice studies. As we end this module, we summarize the key steps to get a research program started. Publishing, the final step, is critical for academics, though rather less so for practitioners simply looking to improve their own performance. But you may wish to consider this step to ensure that your research findings add to the pool of global knowledge. In conclusion, research and innovation are critical to the success of the blood donor program. Every recruiter has the opportunity to contribute to both the global research pool and the generation of much-needed data relevant to the local setting. Be open to or seek opportunities for collaborations which may bring with them resources such as time, money, and expertise. Please use these prompts to help you reflect on what you have learned. This module concludes the educational series. We trust you will use the knowledge acquired to pursue better donor recruitment, retention, and management practices, and in doing so, save even more lives.